So thank you, Professor Pandey, Professor Chaudhary.
Welcome to virtual reality.
Yes.
Yes.
So Tushar, our audience is already there. I have messages from some people saying they're watching us. So maybe we can, I'll go on mute till Professor Cooper finishes. Okay.
I'm also muting.
So I think let us start it. And as an outset, I welcome you all the three panelists, Professor Seth Cooper, Professor Nandita Chaudhary ma'am, Janak sir, and all our attendees who are joining this webinar on this Zoom panel, as well as many other who are watching Facebook live streaming. So I welcome you all. Let me tell you the idea behind these webinars came out from Seth Cooper sir, who in his discussions with Professor Prakash Padikanya asked and wanted to know what NAOP is doing in India in this pandemic situation and how psychologists in India are in generally responding to this situation. And during those discussions, it was also felt that NAOP as an vibrant academic community must take initiative to educate um, psychology students, teachers, researchers, and general public in various issues that might be occurring during this situation. In this series, we had our first workshop on June 26th, first webinar on June 26th on issues related to children and adolescent that was hosted by Professor Bhumika Kar from CBCS. And this is second in this series, and we know that there will be many more after this. This particular webinar focuses on psychosocial issues, as we have already known that world in general is fighting from a pandemic, and this is not the concern is not only the medical and clinical implications of the pandemic, but the psychosocial implications of this pandemic is far reaching and more severe. We have seen globally in every country people are suffering, and they have to decide, they are basically unable to decide whether they should support these lockdowns or oppose this. Where this at one hand these lockdowns and shutting down all the activities is helping people remaining safe in their households, but at the same time it is making people jobless, increasing in security, food and security issues. And thus there is a general debate among all social scientists and other professionals that whether we should go further with this shutdown of activities or we should try to think about some other issue. There were many other psychosocial issues that arises. We are seeing stigma which were prevalent against not only the medical community, police personnel, but also about several religious as well as other social groups. We have seen increase in violence against women in the household. That is a global phenomenon now in every country. Agencies that are responsible for safety and security of women have raised their concern, and there are n number of lists that could be listed which is there due to this pandemic situation. I am sure that our learned speakers today will throw light on some of these issues and try to inculcate and initiate discussion on these issues, which is not only Indian but also globally. So I would like to participants, those who are, I'm sure our panelists are well known to everybody, but as a customary, I will introduce our today's panelists to the participants who might not be um, knowing or aware about them. So our first panelist is Professor Sats Cooper. Professor Sats Cooper, I met him in 2012 when I joined International Congress of Psychology in Cape Town, South Africa. I was fortunate enough to meet him personally, and that was the same year when Professor Sats Cooper was elected President of International Union of Psychological Sciences. And he was the first uh, person from probably from the African continent who was elected the president. At present, he is past president of the union. He is also professor at University of Pretoria and honorary professor at the University of Limpopo. He has been the vice president of the International Social Science Council, and he was the founding president of the Pan African Psychology Union. He is the fellow of Psychological Society of South Africa, and it is our pleasure to also note that he is also the fellow of our National Academy of Psychology. He is honorary fellow of British and Irish Psychological Societies. Listing Professor Sats' contributions are too much, and it is not possible to detail all his contributions in this limited time, but he is well known for his contributions in South African psychology community specifically and psychology community throughout the globe in general. He has helped the South African community to heal from the trauma of apartheid, advanced human rights and support of democracy. He has helped create the Psychological Society of South Africa, which was probably the first South African psychology organization which did not discriminated based on any race, gender, color, or caste. He has played leadership roles in various community, cultural, educational, developmental, political, professional, and other entities in South Africa and abroad. He has also informed institutional and governmental policy and is a regular commentator in a print and electronic media in South Africa as well as abroad on psychological and related issues. I welcome you, sir, and on my personal behalf, on the behalf of National Academy of Psychology, and on the behalf of Indian psychology community, I welcome you. It's my pleasure to be here with you. Next, I would like to introduce our very own Professor Nandita Chaudhary, ma'am, who is a consultant and collaborators on projects, programs, and publications on child development, family studies, and cultural psychology, with special reference to Indian community. She has taught at Lady Irwin College, University of Delhi, for over 3 decades before seeking an early retirement to focus more on her creative and research projects. She has been a Fulbright research scholar and have received senior fellow grants from UGC and Indian Council of Social Science Research. She has published her work at various domains, including general articles, book chapters, edited volumes, as well as she has been writing blogs. Her blog on Masala Chai is very famous, in which she keep writing about little people. So I will, in during this webinar, I will share the link of her blog also in the chat box, so people who are interested may visit there also. So these are our two main speaker for the today, and I'm also very happy to note that my own teacher and mentor, Professor Janak Pandey, was kindly agreed to moderate this webinar session. He is currently ICSSR National Fellow at Center for Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences, University of Allahabad. He was founder vice chancellor of the Central University of South Bihar, and he has been the head department of psychology, University of Allahabad, and head UGC Center for Excellence for Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences. He has been the coordinator for the Center of Advanced Study in Psychology. Uh, Talking about Professor Janak Pandey, sir, is also a very time-taking thing, but he has been well known in Indian community, not only psychology community, but also other scholarly community for his contributions in form of two book series on psychology in India and Psychology in India Revisited, which was very popular not only among the psychologists but also for people who are preparing for civil services. And majority of the presently working civil servants in India have been benefited by his book series. He was past president of IS International Association of Cross Cultural Psychology, past president of National Academy of Psychology, and currently is past president of Division 3 of International Association of Applied Psychology. He has also been involved with International Union of Psychology Sciences, Psychological Sciences as an executive member, and still very much active in national and international psychology bodies. I welcome you also, sir, for this webinar, and I am sure that your presence will make this webinar more vibrant and learning. It will be a learning insight. So I again welcome all you three and all the attendees we had. As an outside, I would like to note that we had about 415 registrations for this workshop, for this webinar. We can see 105 participants here because that's the limit for our Zoom license. But there are more than 100 people who are watching it live on Facebook now, Facebook page, and I'm sure many others would be joining in some time. So with this note, I would like to um, hand it over to Janak sir to invite and request him to invite Sat sir for his talk today on the topic time to change. Over to Janak sir. Sir, you may unmute your, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Tushar, for introducing all three of us very generously. I would very much like to welcome both Professor Sat Cooper and Professor Chaudhary physically, but nonetheless, technology gives us an opportunity to see us face to face and address the audience. I would begin with requesting Professor Sat Cooper, and he may take his time, but it should not exceed, say, 25 to 30 minutes. So, Professor Sat Cooper, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction. It is my singular honor to share with all of you in our splendid isolation certain perspectives on what has become the worst global public health emergency in a century. We've had in the 1968 to 1969 period, the Hong Kong epidemic, but this coronavirus, novel coronavirus COVID-19 has impacted our world indelibly, especially in the manner in which most of our political, our social, religious, and economic leaders have dealt with the resultant socioeconomic chaos, and importantly, the consequences for people's lives. On the 23rd of April, well over a month after the World Health Organization declared this a pandemic, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres proclaimed to the world that, quote, "We are all in this together." But in the manner in which we've dealt with it, that is a question that begs a response. because it is clear that we are not all of us together in dealing with this. The previous emergencies that our interconnected and fragile, disparate world has confronted, there have been some semblance of regional, if not a modicum of world understanding and cooperation on such emergencies. This perilous period has laid bare socioeconomic and geopolitical fault lines everywhere. What the UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed has called exposing the frailties and inequalities of our societies. And you in India and me in the southern tip of the African continent resonate with those sentiments about the inequalities in our societies, occasioned significantly by colonialism and the post-colonial order, in which the majority have been left out effectively of all decision-making. They are acted upon instead of acting in their own stead. The fairly rigid nationalistic responses to this virus that respects no borders have set in motion a tragic spectacle of a strident few leaders, political especially, reverting to dangerous ethnocentric type, navel-gazing in their obsession with just themselves and some in their respective countries, with hardly a care for the majority in their own countries, let alone in our world, especially the most vulnerable. We've been subjected to war talk and knee-jerk blaming of the World Health Organization, which together with the Office of the UN Secretary General have been the isolated voices of global reason, advocating for solidarity and pleading for closer collaboration and coordinated effort in containing the extremely destructive effects of this pandemic. Instead of what the UN Secretary General has called for brave, visionary, and collaborative leadership, we've been shamed by the spectacle of inept, immature leaders, often out of their depth, denying and not relying on science, quickly resorting to populist rhetoric, unscientific cures, and dangerously engendering hate speech against not only their own nationals, but others around the world. Since the 11th of March, when this was declared a pandemic, we have witnessed almost every country and territory responding with narrow measures, as if the deadly virus respects borders and jurisdictions. We saw it when Italy was impacted and the EU effectively deconstructed into narrow nation states, closing borders amongst themselves. Initially, psychology also tended towards navel gazing because everyone was in a state of shock. People weren't prepared for this. Even you who are affected by seasonal natural disasters, who can forget the 2004 December tsunami that impacted your country and other countries in South and Southeast Asia. We began to focus on our own concerns. We did not look at the impact out there in our countries, in our societies, how people without better a repertoire of skills to fend off the unremitting social media messages and all our media, electronic and print, just delving on COVID. The fear engendered in us, the uncertainty, the insecurity has been immense. Practitioners of psychology in particular were concerned by issues such as how much and who to bill for providing counseling and virtual services, almost ignoring the bigger picture that was emerging. But psychologists were eager to equip themselves to meet the challenges, as nothing in our education and training in the many hard years quite prepared us for what began unfurling at quite a rapid pace. Psychologists are renowned for our ability to mediate change, which is ever present in the human condition and a constant in life. But as the sheer scale of the pandemic began to emerge, there seemed to be anxiety of what to do and how to do it. And true to form, some psychologists, especially in leadership, in places where psychology as a public practice is fairly well established, and that's in the northern and western countries, began to trot out their advice. How should we, in the language that Janak Pandey and others have used, in the majority world, deal with their own condition? We are the interpreters of our behavior, our socioeconomic dynamics that shape our responses to situation. But these persons had the temerity by the end of March to punt their advice on their understanding of what we should be doing. An infodemic of psychological do-it-yourself quickly developed. It's very likely that many of us in psychological leadership will exploit and dine out on COVID for at least a decade after it is brought under control. And the current indications are it's not going to be brought under control in the next few months. By their very nature, crises throw up those who are willing to help, those who are able to help, those who won't help, and those who feel they can't help. And the rest of us, who are probably the majority, who just get on with doing the best we can without harming those we purport to help. NELP is a member and country member of the International Union of Psychological Science, and we put out a survey in May on sharing resources, finding out what was happening in each of our countries. True to form, one or two Western countries claimed they were doing everything. And yet, if you look at the statistics, they lead in the countries with the most chaotic response to COVID. There was also a section on whether you prepared to share resources. And it was surprising that whilst the majority agreed they will share resources, some significant psychology dispensations felt neutral about sharing resources. It tells us that the individualistic paradigm that really comes to us from the West has grabbed our attention and shaped how we respond not only to our own condition, but our cognition about what is happening all around us. The exclusions in psychological literature of majority world findings on behavior have become stark in this period. We go back to what Amina Mohammed talks about, the frailties and the fault lines, about the inequalities in global society. That has become exacerbated. In the introduction, Tushar covered some of the effects that you are confronting in India, especially gender-based violence, and probably abuse and neglect of vulnerable other populations, maybe the elderly and perhaps children. The lockdown conditions that were quite strict in your country, in mine, in many others, did put a clamp on the spread of the virus. However, economic exigencies have determined that politicians to re-election quickly opened up, and the result is your country and mine. Yours is third in COVID infections. Mine is 13th and fastly moving upward. We have tended to not look at this using our own historical, cultural, and other resilience in dealing with it. Perhaps the hardest thing is for people in our societies to socially distance, because we come from a communal background. We care for those around us. We share with those around us. But the advent of a stark colonial dispensation, the extraction economies in our countries, and the imposition of a very individualistic upward mobility socioeconomically has impacted also psychology. That dyadic one-on-one interaction, which is typically taught in the counseling and therapeutic space, actually doesn't work in our countries, because we ignoring the community and compassion, the consideration, the caring that is existent amongst our people, even when they have so little. So we need to rely in this period on looking at our own resources, historic and cultural, and the factors that have created sheer survival. If anything, many are likely to die of hunger in our countries than of COVID. But that shouldn't be making us look less at what the devastation of COVID is. In this period as well, social media has engrossed us. And all over, people are more turning inward instead of looking at the caring and the sharing and the compassion. We are now tended to look at an individualistic selfishness, which runs counter to our histories, to our cultural and our upbringing. Social distancing, as I pointed out, is very hard. But the messages about hand washing, and we know clean water, clean running water, is not available in our countries. The cost of soap is outrageously high. And yet our leaders tell us, if you can't wash with soap and water, use a sanitizer. It's almost like Marie Antoinette saying, well, if the people don't have bread, let them eat cake. More than 70% of the world's least developed countries are in Africa. And the entire continent is classified as high in poverty, low in nutrition, health, education, and adult literacy, and facing economic vulnerability. Yet, it's a resource-rich continent, but where rampant extraction is afoot. The displaced, the marginalized, the underserved, who have for the most part invisibly eked out their daily grinding existence, are ironically for once on an equal footing with the rest of the world in confronting the depredations of the pandemic. The World Bank in October 2018 noted that nearly half the world lives on less than $5.5 US a day. Now, if you look at India, it's some 350 Indian rupees that people rely on. So our post-COVID world cannot return to the injustices and exclusions, the gross inequality that consumes us not only between countries, but intra-country, the huge differentials in India, in South Africa. Yet, India is the 5th largest economy after the United States, China, Japan, and Germany. So we need to consider that this year is 2020. You know, in 20 years ago, we all looked at 2020 vision, but it's not quite apparent that we have grasped that vision. We're witness to also overshadowing the human solidarity that the WHO has consistently been appealing for, and the articulated and coordinated response to this global emergency that the UN has been pleading for. But there's been some light. Female leadership in times of crisis, Angela Merkel, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan, and the Nordic Erna Solberg, Katrin Jakobsdottir, Mette Frederiksen, and Sanna Marin seem to have made a difference. We as psychologists and as members of the human community must and can stand together at this time of severe uncertainty and worldwide insecurity, displaying the hope of a shared and better future. But the focus on creating a vaccine is going to mean that oligarchs controlling the pharma and related industries are going to be the new determiners of economic viability and future. Heaven forbid that we move from the gross inequalities, where the SDGs are unlikely to be achieved in the next 20 or 30 years, to one where just a handful of mega rich people control the world. Our collective knowledge of the human condition in distress and the unremitting impacts should guide a more considered, compassionate understanding that should shine through the rhetoric and give hope to all our people everywhere, that this too shall pass, as we do the best we can to help those around us to deal with the pandemic and its terrible consequences. We are obliged to commit to ensuring that the post-COVID world is more inclusive, considerate, and compassionate. How we treat the worst off amongst us is a mark of our common humanity. I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Professor Seth Cooper. I think it was a brilliant exposition of the present situation world is going through. We may have some question which we will take at the end. I hope you will stay with us till this session is over. So, I suggest the audience that if they have some specific question related to address of Professor Cooper, they may write it, and Tushar will select a few questions and present at the end. Thank you again. It is great pleasure to see you, and I think those who do not know him, he has been to NAOP meeting. He has signed a collaboration with NAOP, and South African Society and NAOP both are related in that sense. So thank you, sir, for giving us a very thoughtful address to NAOP members and to this audience. Thank you so much. Now I invite Professor Nandita Chaudhary. She has been already introduced, so I would not like to again repeat those things related to her background and invite her to give her address. Please come.
Namaskar, Professor Pandey. Thank you very much for the invitation, Tushar. Professor Cooper, your presentation was remarkable. And I think you were able to identify so many important points in the international scene as far as the COVID reaction is concerned. I'm going to focus a little bit more on the within country situation, but I will make references to the international scene as well. Um, I also want to focus a little bit more, because that's the area in which I work, on childhood and family life, and the psychosocial impact of COVID-19. If we are not going to know until all this is over what really happened, why the infections went in a particular way, what were the real consequences. Right now, we just have impressions, and we are only going to know about this later. So whatever sense we make of it is going to be approximate. It's just going to be based on information that we gather primarily from social media. The research findings, even in epidemiology, are not yet forthcoming in the same way as we would like them to. I want to start by saying that the whole issue of Vision 2020 that Professor Cooper talked about is an important one, and it's ironic that we stand in the year 2020 at a historical divide between the what Friedman called BC and AC, before Corona and after Corona. We were all hit. We were taken completely unawares, unprepared, and as mentioned before me, some of the wealthiest nations were left completely unprepared to handle what hit them. If we look back at the consequences that happened, I mean, some of the collective impact on India, in hindsight now 2-3 months later, has been the massive impact that it had on migrant labor in cities. And that is something that, as whenever a crisis hits our weak points as well as our strengths, it tends to highlight both. So as far as our strengths were concerned, I will definitely talk about that as well. But as far as our collective weakness was concerned, we were not prepared for the 139 million workers who inhabit our cities, who move from their places, and the vision of people returning home with carrying their children and carrying their meager belongings, and sometimes even their pet dogs along with them, was something that I think will stay in our memories for a long time. The second major impact and this time on the household, has been this whole work from home, study from home issue that I am going to be talking about a little bit. By and large, home is not seen as a place where you work. Like one of my friends always starts her lectures in college by asking students, how many of your mothers work? And only a few hands are raised. And she follows that up with a question, so does your mother sit at home all day? And the students respond by saying, no, my mother works a lot. There is an impression that we have that within the domestic space, everything that we do is informal, it's casual, you may or may not do it, and what work do you do anyway? I think and I hope that the impact of the pandemic is going to have some important consequences on how we view the domestic area as a place where work is done, where serious work is done, bringing up children, handling the home. These are all very serious and life, these have consequences for the lives of people. So in an interesting aside, the 8-year-old Mohit, who lives in Noida, said about his study from home. He said that I'm translating from Hindi. He says, my teachers are working much harder, and the other good thing is that they cannot scold or even spank me now. I don't want lockdown to open. So here we see consequences that are happening to children. Yes, there is fear, there is a uncertainty. I will address that, but we must understand that somewhere the safety of the home for those children, women, and family members who have a safe and loving home. This has been a time when the fear and uncertainty has been handled by that. My heart goes out to children who don't have the benefit of such an arrangement, who don't have the safety of a space where they can be protected from abuse or violence, as well as for women. So in those instances, perhaps we can conclude that they have become even more vulnerable. We use the term social distancing, and I have repeated ad nauseum that, social distancing is not what we need. We need to continue to be socially available to each other even more now than before. It is physical distancing that we need to focus on. But physical distancing does not mean that we don't look into each other's eyes from a safe distance. We don't smile at each other. We don't exchange conversations with the proper, precautions. For some, even physical distancing has not been possible. And I here want to bring up the case of Dharavi in Mumbai, where I live presently. Dharavi has shown us a way that even within circumstances where physical distancing itself is a challenge, there was only one case of COVID in Dharavi yesterday. How did they do this? It is a remarkable story. It's a story that has been widely shared in the Indian news. I'm not sure if it has reached the international news, because I think international news is more eager to talk about what is wrong in India rather than what is right. So what they did in Dharavi was they took local doctors who were familiar with the families, who had been practicing there for years. They enrolled them in their campaign. And that is the main reason why the campaign was successful, and they have been able to I don't want to say conquer, but at least, they have been able to handle the problem of spread from person to person, in spite of the fact that this is a region in which physical distancing is very difficult. They gave people the option. We will give you food, we will give you a place to stay. The quarantine facilities were very effective at that. Schools were used to quarantine people away. And another important thing, for at least for a month and a half, was the movement of essential goods. And there were people who did not have access to food, people who don't have, the comical news that we got about people hoarding toilet paper was something that, it was, if it wasn't so funny, it would have been heartbreaking. That, people are collecting waste paper rather than, looking at, and here in our country we have, so when we have examples of how people react, you can see how dramatic the differences between countries are. Some of the issues related to childcare in school and urgent medical attention, I just had a message from Professor Day, who is the president of the NAOP, that she had some difficulty and was not able to attend to it. So the consequences that have happened on regular medical attention to people has been difficult for children and families. And this is again in those cases where people were not infected with the virus itself, but had other conditions that needed attention. the prevailing, one of the social consequences was that there's something has shaken up between the economic classes. What, I'm not sure if I can, wrap it up adequately, but this is based on conversations that we hear, that in people believe that this is a problem that came from the wealthy who have access to travel, but it infected everybody. And you know the it was the wealthy people who were seen as carriers of the infection. Usually it is the other way around. We had maids in Mumbai complaining that we are not going to go for work, primarily because they have a fear of getting infected. Somehow 3 months later it seems to have reversed itself again. The middle and upper classes are feeling now we need to protect ourselves from those people. So somewhere I don't know how long or how this is going to resolve itself. Only the future will tell. Then there was this issue of part-time domestic help, which is a very large workforce in India. Middle class families, suddenly this support was suspended. All of us are used to conducting our professional work with the benefit, particularly, again, I think this may be more true for women than it is for men, because still we see that the divisions within the home are more, are carried out more by women than by men. But maybe that's not true for everyone. But my observations have shown that this particular work from home idea has hit women harder than it has men. The opportunity, some have said that, sometimes going out for work is a relief from the amount of work that has been done. Yes, there are some people who are enjoying cooking and, posting pictures of how, they're having fun at home with everyone. But I don't think that is the case for everyone. And we need to be alert to how these reactions will take place. How will we recover the relationship with between the employer and employee, whether it is in factories or in homes or in schools? How will the student and teacher realign themselves to this post-COVID world? Are questions that we as psychologists need to focus on. The employer class will need to think very carefully about how we deal with reopening. Schools will have to deal very carefully with how we reopen schools, how we make sure that children feel safe when they come back. Right now, it seems that even reopening is a distant dream. Professor Cooper talked a little bit about fear and uncertainty that has gripped all of us. Every time we had a case in our neighborhood announced on the WhatsApp group, I remember that clutch of fear. Oh my God, it's here. Oh my God, it's coming closer. A lot of this has been on account of the virus itself. I mean, it's a deadly virus. There's no doubt about that. I'm not underestimating that. But that is escalated by the fact that we have disease models, shared with, the curve is going higher. The word spike, I think the first word I see in the newspaper every day is new spike, and a higher spike than yesterday. It seems to have become the words like unprecedented, crisis. And these are words that have become regular in our news. Another important consequence, I think, has been on account of the fact that public health has been ignored. And this is not just true of India. This is shared even in the wealthiest of countries, and we have paid a price for that. Also, anytime round the clock media coverage. That means whenever you wake up, the first thing is you go and see, and newspapers have made it very easy to access COVID news. So there is a specific blurb where you see COVID news. Meanwhile, our leaders are also looking for an opportunity to destroy and rebuild. Why else would, at this time, in a post-pandemic world, when countries are reeling, why should we have border issues at a time like this? I fail to understand how this can be justified. But the fear and uncertainty has impacted different people differently. Rural, urban, tribal relationships also seem to have changed. A lot of the people who went back to their rural areas are not coming back. Some are gradually, trickling back in, but others are saying that we feel safer and we're going to look for work. And let us hope that some balancing has taken place in the unbridled romance of the city. If that has happened, and if that continues consistently, it will be a very good thing for the country. Till now, in the news as well as in personal conversations with relatives in villages and other parts, tribal areas, the cases have been very few. The migrant workers who went back were responsible enough to quarantine themselves in schools. Some even stayed on trees so that their relatives would not be harmed. But of course, some were also not allowed in. So there are stories, as Professor Cooper said, this is a time in a crisis where we can see separate categories of people who are willing to help, people who are not willing to help, people who are willing to hurt others, and people who are able to do nothing about it. The impact on small businesses and livelihoods is very serious. In our own lives, we have encountered people who have run out of money because all their savings have been depleted. And this is not true just for the poor. This is true for businesses at all scales. Religious institutions and religious leaders have taken a temporary backseat. I mean, at least that is my impression. Great deal of respect to the religious institutions that shut down for the safety of the people. Another thing that I am very deeply proud of is, unlike particularly the US, where people are fighting, some people are fighting for the freedom not to wear masks. You go out in Mumbai for an emergency trip, and I have yet to see a single person without a mask. So here, whatever you might say about the chaos that there is in the city, I'm proud of its people that they respect each other, because when you wear a mask, you're doing it more to protect the other person than yourself. This is a major pause in our lives, and we are reading pleasant stories about the fact that nature is healing itself. And I think it gives us an opportunity to feel good, at least some compensation for the other things that we are feeling. So coming back to the issue of accidental exposure during a crisis, the lockdown, when it causes panic exposes social architecture and moral values. Cultural patterns become somewhat unmasked to show weaknesses, but sometimes strengths may go unnoticed. And I want to now focus on some of the strengths. The family is our biggest strength. We have in recent times looked at how international NGOs are trying to advise us on how to bring up our children, on how to care for the elderly, on how to conduct our households, on how to talk to our children, on how to feed our children, what to feed our children with. I think it is time that the international NGOs that are based in 20th century structures, I think it is time for us to realize that this sort of time is when we have to bring back the respect for the family, rather than adopting unfamiliar practices of child protection services where children can be taken away from family for not caring for their children. This is a time to strengthen the family for everything that it does. Siblings, the care that siblings uh, are showing towards each other. This is a time when we need to reinforce togetherness. Learning at home, why do we treat the fact that there is a separation between learning at school and learning at home? This is something I've been fighting for so long. Early childhood educationists believe that children come to school knowing nothing. Isko to kuch nahi pata hai. That kind of approach that we have towards children's learning has to go. And children are not learning only because of online classes. We need to be more humble. Children are learning to deal with a very serious crisis. They're learning how to survive. They're learning to be inventive. They're learning to cope with a situation where adults have given up. So let us not underestimate the learning that takes place at home. Let us not underestimate community experiences that children have. Children are creative and ingenious. They have ways of understanding, which I think schools need to recognize. Schools also need to recognize that they are not the world's final answer to education. It is in partnership with parents that that socialization and education is accomplished. I want to bring up this home no work and office work and school work divide again. To talk about the non-working mother, we also think that the child who stays at home doesn't learn. We need to review that. Home is associated with fun and flexibility, not learning, and school with its opposite. Gandhi ji once wrote in an essay that it is when you enjoy your work that you do the best. So let us look at these divisions that we have created in our lives, because we have been given an opportunity, not a favorable one. The crisis is not a favorable opportunity, but it is an opportunity to review the way we understand our lives. Children have been very inventive. They have picked up skills. We have examples of children who have learned how to deal with online classes. As adults, we may require the help of our children to to switch on Zoom or to unmute or to chat, but children will pick up these things so fast. In our college, we had an instance where some of the students were not very happy about online teaching. And that is again something that we had to respect, because they didn't want to view the homes of other people, and they didn't want their homes to be seen. Many of them complained that they did not have internet access. So we have to understand that now perhaps access to internet has become a basic need for education and higher education, because we do not want children to be marginalized on the basis of the fact that they do not have access. When a family member, a close friend of ours has just survived, the husband, wife, and child have just survived from a very severe COVID infection, and the outcome on the children there has been very serious, because the child saw father was absent in the ICU for many days, and when they came back home successfully healed, there are consequences of insomnia on the parents, and there are other difficulties, and the child, before picking up any object, this 6-year-old asks the mother, "Can I pick it up? Does it have a virus?" So we need to have conversations about the fact that the psychological impact when a family gets infected is going to be very serious. The relationship between grandparents and children has had a temporary pause because for the protection of the parents.
Please conclude.
Yes.
Please conclude.
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically what, these are urgent issues that we need to look at. They're both national and international. The way we cover news, what news we cover, how we open up. We have to look very deeply. My main point is that the importance of the family must be reinstated in post-COVID times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chaudhary, for covering a range of issues, children to family to women to migrant laborers. We have less than half an hour. So I will take 10 minutes not to sum up these two excellent presentations, but to share some of my thoughts. And then it will give us around 15 minutes to take up the questions which will be presented by Tushar. My comments. I think this pandemic has brought us how to cope with uncertainties. And this uncertainties is much more difficult because of lack of scientific knowledge about the disease. And whatever knowledge is getting communicated, at least in this country, the scientific knowledge is not reaching to the masses who do not have access to modern media and modern gadget. Now, this was seen during the early period after couple of weeks, 3 weeks when lockdown was again announced to be extended, and migrant laborers started to move. What was happening? Probably they were so anxious, helpless. They were locked down in their home, but most of them did not have their own home. We know that in people live in streets, live on the sidelines and marginalized kind of shelters, or even they have a accommodation where they sleep in the shift. They do not have a proper bed for themselves. So they were also locked down. The number is not less. I think the number, some people estimate it was more than 100 million. And these migrant workers started taking impulsive decisions because in hours of uncertainty and extreme anxiety, your cognitive functioning is poor and you will start taking impulsive decisions. Such impulsive decision to walk with family and children for 1500 kilometers, 2000 kilometers from Cochin to Calcutta or somewhere in Odisha and Bihar. So we have seen that. It was the scene many people try to remember what happened during the partition period in 1947. The same people, same kind of scene were seen on our roads. So that have we tried to study that? Why people were so anxious to get back to the home? What Seth mentioned in the beginning, that collectivistic society need for affiliation, and in crisis, people like to go to their own people rather than stay there. I think this We have a long history of indentured labor. Now we have a new realities, and that is of migrant labor. And this is a challenging task for all of us to study their agony when they have gone back now to their own home. What is happening in rural areas? We have uh, knowledge about that. What I would like to say that in crisis, in uncertainties, we see the best of human behavior, and we also see the worst of human behavior. What is the challenging task for psychologists? When the best of human behavior comes out, what is the explanation for it? What are its forms? How it happens? And when the other kind of behavior take place. So this gives us opportunity to study behavior with new perspective. The perspective is set by these uncertainties, this crisis, and then probably we'll be able to contribute from psychological science perspective to understand those behaviors. Some of the worst human behavior we have seen victimizing certain group, that corona is spreading due to particular group. Then stigmatization. Now we see the worst form is coming out, and in each city you will see every day in morning in newspaper incidences of suicide. So we need to work on that. And who will work on that if psychologists do not come forward? The children issue, I think, have been covered by Professor Chaudhary and also by Sawat Cooper. I have two issues in mind. One, online courses for whom? For those who are privileged, those who have home, those who have gadgets, computers, and smartphones. But what about those children who do not have proper home? They live in huts, they live in the street, they do not have access to these things. So we need to think about that, what is going to happen. There is another thing associated with the children. They used to go to Sarkari government school and eat midday meal. And we know the way midday meal has done miracle in this country in terms of school attendance. Now what is happening? The only state that has responded to this is Kerala. In Kerala, a decision was made by the Kerala government that a school will be closed, but midday meal will be delivered to the children by the teachers. And that has been going on. Actually, this country and other states in this country need to learn a lot from Kerala, because Kerala was the first state to be victim of this virus, and they are doing the best in the country. Now, I would like to little bit do sermoning for NAOP, what NAOP is doing as organization, and what NAOP executive committee and members are doing. As a member, I would like to demand from NAOP that NAOP should organize some online professional courses to empower its members and others in counseling and practice of psychological science in the hour of crisis. Such courses can be designed. We can collaborate with international institutions and organize such courses. I'm sure many colleagues would like to take such courses empower themselves and deliver to society a certain kind of help which is badly needed. The second thing I would like to suggest to NAOP, that NAOP must look at the education of psychology, right from bachelor, master to PhD level. What kind of syllabus we have? Have we empowered our master and PhDs to intervene when such kind of crisis comes in to the nation or to the world? We need to take a look of the syllabus and courses and work on that. The third thing I would like to request the NAOP to identify research areas, certain vulnerable population which are suffering worst, to study them and become a voice for them. Unless we do that, we will be failing in our professional duty. I think I'm saying this when an international figure like Professor Seth Cooper is present here, and I would request Tushar to carry this voice to NAOP executive to plan it further. So I would like to stop here. I have done it in 10 minutes, and I would like to suggest Tushar to pick up certain questions, mention it to the person concerned if it is asked to a specific person, and then we have still time for discussion around 25 minutes. Not 25 minutes, 15 minutes.
Yeah. Thank
Tushar.
you. Is Seth sir there? Can I request you to come on camera? Seth sir, yeah, thank you, sir. So there are few questions. I have listed it down on a PowerPoint presentation. I have taken questions from Facebook Live as well, because there were many questions, interesting questions on Facebook Live. So what I will do, I will share it on screen also for the participants. Those who have connectivity problem, they can view the questions, and I will read it out for you people. First few questions are for Seth sir. They are basically related with Seth sir thing, and is my screen visible, sir?
Yes, but this one is for Prof. Nandika.
Yeah.
I'm trying to
Oh, okay.
first thing.
All right.
It's on first. Nemoji Hope is from Zambia.
Yes.
I guess Seth sir already answered part of his question online. But one part is still left. He is a student from Zambia, South Africa, studying international psychology in India, and his concern is about people with disabilities. He says that they have not been included in the planning, and it has led to unplanned consequences. One example can be people with hearing impairment. They cannot listen to or enjoy these. The example of this webinar is also there. They cannot enjoy these things. So he had asked for permission, which we have already given, that yes, he can live it on place it on his YouTube channel in sign language. But yes, there is a policy question for you, Seth sir. What about people with disabilities?
Okay. Do you want to just go to the next questions as well so that I can
Yes, and
respond to,
yeah, then
I
the
Yeah.
can
next
see the
question
question.
is from Harleen Kaur. His concern is about the challenges of youth's zeal
Yeah,
during
I've
COVID-19.
seen that. Okay.
Yeah, they are though they are less vulnerable to COVID, but more vulnerable to losing the energy they had to continue the same after the
Sure.
crisis.
I can see that one.
And
Sure.
it is specifically, she have given reference about Indian youth. Third question is from Ms. Hina Yadav. It is about survival is of the fittest as an explanation to not sharing the resources. And second part of the question is, in general, humans seek for power,
Mhm.
which may be a natural phenomena, but now that world is facing the pandemic, do you think power redistribution is possible? And another question is from Manikesh Kumar. Don't you think increasing immunity is better than going for vaccines for every viruses? Yeah, I think these four questions are specifically to you, sir, and I would request you give your views on these. And then there are questions for Nandita ma'am.
Okay. Let me say straight out to Hope that you've highlighted one of the major fault lines in societies in most of the world, except for a handful of societies where the human development indices are quite high. These happen to be countries like, the Nordic countries, New Zealand, Canada, and so on. And it's about the policy. In our countries where we have huge inequalities and huge earning and other gaps and discriminations, those with uh, other abilities, any impairments, tend to be at the lowest of the pecking order in society. And that's why I said in my presentation that we ought to return to a position of compassion, caring, and consideration for those amongst us who are the most vulnerable. All our scriptures, whether it is Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, talk about caring for those who are vulnerable. In our policy, that's a huge gap. And we allow policymakers to deal with one of the questions that Hina Yadav has raised, survival of the fittest. So we tend also, in who we put out as role models, those who have aggregated unto themselves material and other resources, so that they become the exemplars of desirability. Most recently, as a result of the Black Lives Matter campaign after George Floyd was so gruesomely killed by police in Minnesota, quite a few activists, and particularly young activists in India and elsewhere, have raised the issue of fairness. And all of us are aware that in many of our families, beauty is looked at as, if you're very fair, you must be beautiful, versus if you are dark, you have to be, or more melanin in your pigmentation, like some of us have, and more in parts of the south of the subcontinent, as well as in Africa, then you're not worth something. However, the most highly paid model comes from South Sudan. And somehow, the Guinness Book of Records have claimed her as having the darkest skin tone in the world. How on earth they manage to determine the darkest skin tone is in itself something to be questioned. But somebody who was a Miss USA, um, of Indian origin, but was a Miss USA, raised this question. You've seen the Fair and Lovely ads that have been put out by film stars out of Bollywood, for instance. All of that is part of displaying something that creates the otherness in our society. So that quest for power that Hina Yadav is talking about is not a natural phenomenon. It has become a phenomenon that we have tended to accelerate because of social desirability, because of our prejudices, and because of our inability to deal with ourselves. How we look, the skin tone, and so on of ourselves, that affirmation of self, that goes to the other question on youth and youth activism that Harleen Kaur has raised. I think that this is the time, particularly since our youth is so engaged in social media, to not lose their sense of agency, because youth have raised the issues of gender-based violence. Youth have raised the kinds of gaps in our societies that so shame the rich history that our countries have. And that agency, I think, is invested now in social media and inwardly, but it needs to be garnered. And the role of psychology is to create a greater enabling for a sense of agency and purpose in the world. And yes, some of the issues around increasing immunity is better than finding a vaccine. And of course, I'm pleased that in some of our countries we're using masks. Some practitioners, medical practitioners have said, if the whole world uses masks for at least 2 weeks, the virus will have no host available and it will naturally fritter away. So increasing immunity is important, but it's also about access to healthcare. Look at the lack of access to healthcare in our countries, India and my country, South Africa. We claim certain things, but the majority just are not served in the way that the wealthy and the privileged are, who have access to resources. So the role that I think we must play is to ensure that how we deal, my concluding remark in my presentation, how we deal with the worst off amongst us, the most vulnerable, underpins our own claim to being human and part of the human family, and we should never ever lose track of that. Crass individualism is something which psychology tends to push, but goes counter to our cultures and our histories. And it's about time that we changed psychology in the same way that statues of oppressors are falling. You know, what Shashi Tharoor has asked for, reparations from Britain, is happening all around us, without us, because young people are taking the matter into their own hands because they don't want to lionize oppressors of the past and colonizers of note. Thank you, Tashur.
Thanks, Seth. Yes, thank you so much. I think you covered most of the questions, and we have just now 5 minutes. Tushar, can you ask not all questions to Professor Chaudhary, but 1 or 2 selected?
Yes, sure, sir. I think the questions were many. I will go through it one quickly, and then Professor Chaudhary could choose to answer important questions. So,
Well, she cannot see all of it so quickly.
okay.
The last three.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one relatively long question is, ma'am, from Asan Ahmad. It is about
Don't,
family dynamics in India.
don't read it. Let her answer.
Yeah. Okay, ma'am, it's there on your screen.
Like a political questions related to Kashmir and the issue of 2G and 4G, and let us ask this Ahmad Dar to send this question to on email to Professor Chaudhary, but I am sure this issue is real. The issue is that children of Kashmir are not having the same privilege like the children of the other states. And this discrimination cannot go for children for a long time. It is not a political question. It is a question of their rights to get educated. So I would say that you go to the next question. If Professor Chaudhary wants to add to that.
Yourself.
Yeah, go ahead next.
Ma'am, please unmute yourself. Nandita ma'am, your voice is not coming, it's muted.
You want unmute Professor Nandita.
Yes. I fully agree with you. There is no doubt that all children have to have access, particularly now, given the situation. And let us hope that there will be an improvement in the situation. There is no denying the fact, but the reason why it was there, why the situation has been bad, I think the origin was political. The consequences are not. The fundamental rights of children have been marginalized, and not only in Kashmir, even as you were saying, in other communities, even access to devices are not there. So I would agree with you, and I'll be very happy to receive more questions on email.
This is the last question from you, ma'am, which is there on screen by Shipka.
Okay.
Can you read? Are you able to see it, ma'am?
Yes. So this relates to students who are pursuing engineering, who are highly uncertain and under pressure about the future, especially those seeking placements or joining MS programs abroad, also to youth in general. See, I think every one of us in every role has been challenged, and the youth, I feel that, you know, this is a point when you're launching into the future. And this is a point at which suddenly there has been such a serious pause in your, you know, your ambitions to either study abroad or even in another university within your own country. And we need to put certain basic procedures in higher education in place. I think we are having a lot of discussions on, for instance, just today in the newspapers, there was a thing that final year students of all universities should be promoted, should be given their degrees without any examinations. So I think the country is dealing with the situation, and somehow the only hope we have is that within the next couple of months, we have a better sense of how it's going to be. But I do not know what the answer is going to be about study abroad. I think each country is having, the US is having a back and forth about whether they will allow students or not, but universities are responding by saying, no, we do not want international students to be prevented from coming in. Europe is allowing foreign students to come. So some of the movement between countries, both for tourism as well as for education and for work, will be impacted. There is no doubt about that. And we can only hope that there is a better future for all of us, where we can meet again in physical reality. Thank you very much.
Okay, before we go for closing remarks, there is one interesting question that has come on Facebook Live by Professor Rumana Siddiqui. Uh, it is two questions related asked to Professor Cooper and Professor Pandey, but I will read it once as they connect. She write, in post-COVID scientists societies, how can we use our local wisdom to bridge borders between communities, especially with leaders who would like to exploit the divide? And she further wrote about for Professor Pandey that post-COVID, do we need to seriously rethink about the existing leadership models? I find it a very relevant question in current socio-political scenarios. So I would request you two to deliberate on this briefly before we close this webinar session.
I think the whole world has been impacted, not only by this pandemic, but by the upsurge in pricking the consciousness of particularly young people in different parts of the world as a result of the events in the United States. And that has a resonance, I'm finding, in all the scientific bodies that are at the international level, the various academies, and most recently, the International Science Council, on which I sit on the governing board of, as one of the few social scientists, has been convening to look at the different kinds of exclusions, because it's not only the issue of science development that is equal. It's also about exclusions that happen with some significant exceptions. In the global south, China is emerging with more scientific publications, largely because their government is a centralist controlled one and they can pump money into it. India is reflected in the literature in most disciplines in the world as almost an exception for southern countries, as is South Africa as an exception for African countries. Otherwise, the literature is dominated by the global north, and therefore it's time that we, in the positions of minimal influence that we may have, need to put this out there. If we don't put that out there, most of you joining this seminar who are young will continue to face those obstacles of exclusion. The areas of excellence that we can bring to the scientific discourse, which is not neutral, but is value laden, is something we have to punt. Professor Pandey and I share the same views on this in the spaces that we occupy. If we don't say it, then we are guilty by omission. And I can assure you, we will not remain silent. Thank you.
I think we go by the last word by Professor Seth Cooper. It has been a really great experience that he thought of us and gave so much time. We always look forward to his leadership and guidance. And I'm sure NAOP will explore more and work more hard to guide its member, to lead its members. And that leadership will be in terms of scientific knowledge and so light to the society that will help for emergence of enlightened democratic leadership in the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now, since we are at the end of this program, it's my pleasant duty to thank you all the three learned speakers, Seth sir, Nandita ma'am, Janak sir, for your enlightening presence and enlightening words of wisdom. You would have seen the feedbacks that is emerging on the chat box all about your lectures, and more than this Zoom platform, there are the now Facebook page is filled with comments and appreciations for your shared wisdom. I thank you three all once again for being part of this. I also thank some of our, and I also thank now community, now society to encourage us and be behind me for the organization of this program. I am very thankful to Professor Prakash Padukanya who made it possible for me to contact Seth sir and did all the background work for me. Professor Minati Pandan, President-elect of NAO, Professor Narayanan Srinivasan, President now, Dr. Sonali, Secretary General. They all are not visible here, but they have been with me behind and they have been supporting. And I also thank all the attendees who have been um, with us for the entire duration. We had our full capacity when we started, and when we are ending, it's again up till now we have our full capacity, and more than here we have on our Facebook live page. I thank you all and hope that not only now but psychology community in India and abroad will be standing together, working together, and will be doing our best for not only this pandemic situation but for the well-being of humanity in general. With these words, I thank you all and would seek permission to close this webinar session, and I hope to see you all soon again in person. Thank you all.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
can close
Thank
it
you very much.
with a promise that NAOP is going to come up with some program related to the ideas we presented to you.
Yes, definitely, sir. We at now would be working on your suggestions and
Yes.
definitely come up with the circulation of our activities that we are planning for future. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank,
Thank you.
thanks.